Good morning, class. I hope everyone is doing well this morning. Now that we know how to factor polynomials in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, we're going to learn how to solve polynomial equations in factored form. The first thing we need to do is learn a definition, and that is the zero product property. The zero product property states that if a times b equals 0, then either a equals 0 or b equals 0. Take a moment to pause this video and write down the definition of the zero product property. Now let's look at an example. If we look at the example of the quantity of x minus 3 times the quantity of x plus 2 equals 0, it's already in factored form. It's been broken down into the product of two binomials. Using the zero product property, I'm going to take each factor and set it equal to 0. X minus 3 equals 0, and x plus 2 equals 0. Now I'm going to solve those two equations to get my solutions or my roots of the equation. So in the first one, I would add 3 to both sides of the equation and get x equals 3. And in the second equation, I would subtract 2 from both sides and get x equals negative 2. We had two different factors, so you notice we have two different solutions of the equation. Take a moment to pause this video and write down this example. Now let's look at a second example. We have the quantity of 2x minus 1 times the quantity of 3x plus 5 equals 0. Since it's equal to 0, we can apply our zero product property and set each factor equal to 0. 2x minus 1 equals 0, and 3x plus 5 equals 0. Now I need to go ahead and solve both of those equations, and I will have my two roots or solutions of the equation. So in the first one, I'm going to add 1 to both sides of the equation and get 2x equals 1. And then divide by 2, and we get x equals 1/2. In the second equation, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides of the equation and get 3x equals negative 5. Divide both sides of the equation by 3 and get x equals negative 5/3. So my two solutions are x equals negative 1/2 and x equals negative 5/3. Take a moment to pause this video and write down the second example. Now let's look at an example where our equation is not already in factored form. I notice that it's quadratic because I have an x squared term. Before I can start factoring it, I need to set my equation equal to 0 so that I can apply the zero product property later on. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides of my equation and rewrite it as 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0. Now I'm going to look at my trinomial, and I'm going to factor it using my diamond method. So I'm going to create my x, and remember the top part of the x is the product of a and c. Remember, a is the leading coefficient in front of the squared term, and c is our constant. So I'd multiply together 2 and negative 3 to get negative 6. And in the bottom part of my diamond, I put the value of b, or the coefficient in front of the x term, 5. Now I'm going to look for values that multiply to negative 6 and add to 5. After testing several, I found out that I would multiply together 6 and negative 1 to equal negative 6, and 6 plus negative 1 equals 5. Now that I have my diamond, I'm going to make my area model. In the top left box, I'm going to put my ax squared term, 2x squared. In the bottom right-hand box, I'm going to put my constant term, negative 3. The remaining two boxes are going to be filled out with the values I found in my diamond, 6x and negative 1x. Now I'm going to start looking at the vertical and horizontal pairs of numbers and identifying their greatest common factor. Between 2x squared and 6x, the greatest common factor is 2x. Between negative 1x and negative 3, the greatest common factor is 1. Between 2x squared and negative 1x, the greatest common factor is x. Between 6x and negative 3, the greatest common factor is 3. Now remember to go through and check to make sure that it works out and that the area of each box is what it should be. If I look at the 2x here and the x here and multiply them together, I get 2x squared. That checks out. If I look at the 1 here and the x and I multiply them, I should get negative 1x, but I'm only getting x. That means I need to make the 1 negative. Now if I look at the 3 and the 2x and multiply them, I get the 6x. That checks out. If I multiply the 3 by the negative 1, I get negative 3. That checks out. So I now have my factored form of the equation. My equation would factor into 2x, the quantity of 2x minus 1 times the quantity of x plus 3 equals 0. Now if I set each factor equal to 0 and solve, I will have my solutions to the equation. So if I set 2x minus 1 equal to 0, I would add 1 to both sides and divide by 2 to get x equals 1/2. And if I set x plus 3 equal to 0, I would subtract 3 from both sides of the equation and get x equals negative 3. Therefore, my solutions, or roots to this equation, are x equals 1/2 and x equals negative 3. Take a moment to pause this video and write down this example. I will see you in the Zoom meeting shortly. Remember to also write down any questions that you have.